Hello. What happens to the mind when one has Alzheimer's? And is there a deeper intelligence underneath all of this?
Thank you. This is, of course, connected with what we've been talking about. Consciousness expresses itself, becomes this temporary formation, and then consciousness withdraws from that, and usually that's called death. And it seems with Alzheimer it withdraws from the mind before it withdraws also from the body. So the light of consciousness is no longer flowing through the prism of the mind, and it withdraws. Perhaps it's had enough. It's had enough of this and goes back. And then eventually, of course, the body also goes away. Essentially, the same thing would happen if a brick falls on my head now, hopefully not. Sometimes one needs to be careful with manifestation, especially when you're connected and present, you have to be very careful. Now, if a brick falls on my head now, then consciousness will no longer be able to flow through the prism of this mind. It would withdraw, and it would appear then to you that I've become unconscious. The essence of who I am is withdrawing from. And so that's why this happens. Alzheimer, we don't really know, but I've read a very interesting study some years ago. We tend to look at it from a purely chemical perspective because science is based on material, chemical things, and change in the brain chemistry or the brain cells deteriorating or whatever. I'm sure that also happens. There are certain studies that are not really pursued very much that can be very helpful. Some years ago, somebody studied Alzheimer in a closed community of nuns, a very large monastery, where maybe 200 or so nuns live. And of course, a certain percentage of them developed Alzheimer, similar percentage to the percentage of the total population. And one researcher had the idea of examining the application letters that every nun had written before they were admitted as nuns. Most of them were still fairly young. So they had to write about their lives. Why do you want to become a nun? What have you done? And so on. What is your view of life? And he examined all the letters that they had written, and he could, just by looking at the letters, he could determine with just one or two errors who would be most likely to develop Alzheimer. And what he found was that the writing, the way in which they expressed themselves, some had a creative way of expression. Some had the way in which they put things. There was an element of creativity and a fresh way of looking at things. It was alive. And other letters didn't have this creative spark to them. And those, he said, the likelihood of them developing Alzheimer was much greater. He could say almost with very little error, he hadn't been told, these will probably develop Alzheimer and these probably will not. And nobody really after that pursued that anymore, because we look at it, and scientists look at it from the point of view of brain chemistry mainly. So it seems that there was those who did not, there was a connectedness, a deep connectedness with the source of creativity inside them, with being. And those that developed Alzheimer were not as deeply connected to the source of creativity in them. And that's something that could be pursued. In other words, I would look for the solution to Alzheimer not in the realm of brain chemistry, because brain chemistry accompanies that illness, but look at it in the realm of states of consciousness. And I believe, although I have no scientific evidence for that, that as presence grows in a human being, the likelihood diminishes of developing Alzheimer. But that is something that would need to be tested. I'd like to work at some point with older people, perhaps in old people's communities, because it's such a wonderful opportunity, old age, of disidentifying from form. And our civilization doesn't know that yet. It sees old age as something that has to be endured. It doesn't recognize that old age spiritually, from the point of view of awakening, is the greatest opportunity. And so there is a sense of uselessness around old age in the West that's all pervasive, and that perhaps has a lot to do with the arising of this disease, that sense of uselessness that comes with old age, that sense of lack of purpose, true purpose, inner purpose, awakening. So I'd like to take the teaching as much as possible into also old people's homes and so on, so that old people's homes become changed into ashrams. Every old people's home should really be an ashram. It should be what the greatest places on earth they should be, where human consciousness disidentifies from form. Because what else is there to do when we are getting to the end of this life form? What else is there to do than to use this opportunity to disidentify from form? And nobody knows that, even they don't know it. So that's a great shift. Talking to you about this has given me a new impulse to actually pursue this a bit more now. Usually I wait for things to come to me and say, okay, let's do it. But such sadness around communities where old people live, just waiting rooms for death, such a tragic, missing so tragically that opportunity of old age. Some ancient civilizations still knew that there was something sacred about old age, because they could see that it's the beginning of a letting go of form. So in the ancient civilizations you still have that respect for old age and veneration for old age, and old people are worthy. In old cultures, old people are the guardians of being for the entire culture. It's they, because they are rooted more in the formless than those who still think the forms are all that matters. So they hold that, and the West doesn't have that anymore. So, of course, there's a beginning of an awakening in the West, that is true, but that could be an enormous acceleration of the awakening process if we realize the importance of old age. And then perhaps the disease of Alzheimer will not occur so much anymore, But ultimately, of course, we need to know the truth of the words that summarize the Course in Miracles, those words that present a summary of the entire Course in Miracles, are really a summary of all spiritual teachings, which are: nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So even for those who have Alzheimer, and those people close to them, the ultimate truth still applies. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. And when you know that, peace arises.
Thank you.